Can NATO, or more broadly, the international community like the International Criminal Court, have jurisdiction over US citizens like Elon Musk? Assuming, of course, there was evidence hypothetically in a fantasy scenario. Because the United States does not extradite Americans. Why? Technically, basically, Article 6 Supremacy Clause. I'm sorry, I know it's annoying, but it's extremely powerful. I know this because I have an advanced degree in international law. What does that mean? That if you go into international law, make sure that the entity you want to be held accountable is in the United States. Because actually, under our reality as Americans in the United States, American law is superior to international law. A great example of this is Guantanamo Bay. This article isn't even about a prisoner, so this is literally about a civilian who got justice, but the prisoners have not. But why? Well, in regards to the abuses, it becomes a question of do the prisoners enjoy a protection against torture? Under international law, in fact, they do, technically. Yes, the U.S. is, in fact, a party to this treaty, the Convention Against T-Word and Other Cruel and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. The land that Guantanamo Bay is on belongs to Cuba. Is Cuba a member of this? Yes. But it's being loaned out to the United States, which means that it's under United States jurisdiction. So, do the prisoners have a constitutional right to the 8th Amendment, the protection against cruel and unusual punishments? It's been positioned that it hasn't. I don't have control over that. I'm not a lawyer, nor am I in the government. So what this tells us is that U.S. law supersedes international law. How do we know this? The United States is also a party to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. However, what is the United States famous for? Police beating up and unaliving unarmed Black Americans. So the question becomes, why cannot Black Americans have access to international bodies given that we're a party of this treaty? This is answered beautifully here in our reservations that the United States inputted into our membership of this treaty. What this means is that we said in order for us to sign this treaty, against racial discrimination, you have to accept this reservation. So this applies to us except if this compromise. One of them is that nothing in the convention requires or authorizes legislation or other action by the United States of America prohibited by the Constitution of the United States as interpreted by the United States. What does that tell us? It tells us that, one, the reason why it cannot subvert our jurisdiction is because Article 6, Section 2, the United States Constitution, is the law of the land. However, who gets to interpret what that means? The United States. That's very broad. Is it the courts? Is it Congress? It's the United States. That can also include the international military justice, or at least until it's cleared up, which means that this is why Americans don't have any channels in which to actually seek remedy from the international community. So what we know is that the reason why international law cannot supersede American justice is because Article 6 Supremacy Clause, and obviously the whole supremacy of our constitutional authority above anything else. So the government is saying, we don't have authority to give you authority, international justice, but we'll figure it out and we'll have those law and order in place in order for us to be capable of prosecuting this thing, so you don't have to worry about it. How do we know this? Don't believe me? We have 18 U.S.C. 1091 on G side. You know why? So that the international court does not have to implement G-side against Americans, because the United States judicial system is capable. So yes, I know what you're thinking. Hypothetically, an American justice system that is just can in fact hold Americans who willfully left and committed G-side, possibly in Gaza, accountable under American justice, even though the international courts cannot. But this also can apply to war crimes. 10 U.S.C. 2441 on war crimes, which is a penal code that has been used against Americans before. This tells us that Article 6 Supremacy Clause is above any other entity if you include the attached video to this description on the courts. This tells us as well that there's a lot of loopholes in our reality that are misaligned to what we were actually supposed to strive for according to those provisions, that American kind of North Star that tells us the principles, values, and structure of government. They obviously do this through our intellectual disenfranchisement and not knowing our actual standards, right? The actual framework that we're supposed to follow. They tell us vote for freedom, but if you vote for freedom, then you're gonna vote for what? Religious freedom. So you're gonna vote like a Christian when in fact we have a social contract that mandates we are non-religious, actually multi-religious. So rather you should vote for liberty, and if you disagree with me, go to the preamble, and if you find the word freedom, then tell me that I was wrong. Tell me in the comments. But then we find a lot of loopholes that misalign to that, like what? The electoral college, corporate personhood, and also the fact that even in Amendment 14, Section 3, there is a part that has been interpreted as saying that Congress can choose to remove the ineligibility of an insurrectionist if they voted by majority to do that. How would you have a right to subvert the Constitution? It doesn't make sense. Don't worry, this cannot be invoked because they don't have that necessary in order to do that. However, this tells us what we're supposed to strive towards versus what they've been giving us, which is literally here, the Constitution, right? And then this is what they've been kind of giving us. Whether that's through unwillingness or just sabotage, we're not just quite sure. But the truth is also the fact that politicians have inherited as such a misaligned constitutional perception of what we have as we have, because you've learned a lot on this channel, right? But they've inherited that same perception, and in just knowing that American judicial system, it negates to understand the immense power and influence that the United States has in actually shaping a reality to where it has judicial control of what occurs. For example, the United States telling the ICC to not arrest Bibi. Why? Because we're gonna invade you. That's ridiculous. But can it? If it had a tyrant, maybe. So what? They're going to invade the Netherlands here in red, right? But that's right next to Germany. That's right next to Poland. And guess what's next to that? The Ukraine. What's next to that? Russia. And as such, I introduce you to a very important word for our next video. I know I said this was gonna be on NATO, but apparently it became about the Supremacy clause. I'm sorry, my ADHD kind of realized this was important first, so the next video. Apologies. But globalization describes the growing interdependence of the world's economies, cultures, and populations brought about by cross-border trade in goods and services, technology, and flows of investment, people, and information. Look, what's next to Germany, which is right next to the Netherlands, with Denmark. And why is Denmark important? It has an autonomous territory called Greenland that is between Europe over there and Canada, and also what? Russia's over there, strategic to use national security, right? In order to get what? Canada and Greenland as what? Trump promised. So now the United States is invoking European chaos. So what occurs? Because of this hit over here by Germany and all that chaos from his achievement of a promise, Russia is now capable of taking advantage of this chaos and getting what they've been wanting, the Ukraine. The global implications and consequences of a Trump presidency may be what's required here in order to insert that backbone into President Joe Biden. Why? Globalization, we're interdependent, and this paints a scene for our next video on NATO.